This podcast contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk or call back after you've watched the movie.
You know who you call. Leave a message. Maybe they'll call you back. Then again, maybe they won't.
We're having ourselves quite a little game of phone tag here.
Ring, ring, ring. I usually get this guy's answering machine.
I'll call you right back.
If you're there, please pick up the phone. I really want to talk to you.
I check my fucking messages every day when I come home from work. My answering machine, zero. I got a blinking light.
All I have to do is pick up this phone right here, inform the cinema, and your plan's kaput.
No, I ain't got no phone. I had to pull, because people calling all the time, and who needs the aggravation, right? Interruptions.
Hello and welcome to Cinema Callback on the line edition, where people actually pick up their fucking phones. I'm joined by Dennis Callaghan, who you might remember from the Michael Mann special we did a few weeks ago. How are you doing, Dennis?
Yeah, very good, Andy. Yeah, looking forward to getting into this one. It's been on my list for a while, but yeah, we'll talk about why and what and everything else.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Joe Kidd starring Clint Eastwood, Robert Duvall, and I think it's written by Elmore Leonard as well and directed by, of course, John Sturges. Watching this movie, Dennis, and seeing Clint in all his cool and all his almost untouchable bravado and irritable smoothness, I'm definitely at the spirit animal age where I can fully identify with Clint's moodiness towards people in general. But I wonder what separates him from action stars that always have the upper hand, like, say, Steven Seagal or people like that. Maybe Jason Statham, I don't know, or Arnie and people like that. But especially the ones that are untouchable. Clint sometimes has an air of untouchability about him in terms of he always has the answers in a physical way. But it never annoys me in the way it would, like Steven Seagal, where he thinks if he's always on top and no one touches him, that people find that entertaining. And watching this, where Clint is pretty much a bounty hunter with all the answers, I wonder why we love him so much when he's in that mode compared to other action stars. What do you think?
Yeah, he kind of set the tone for them in other ways. I mean, I'm sure they all look up to him. I'm sure you can find interviews where they harken back to his style because he's before them, but after, say, John Wayne. And yeah, they say John Wayne is kind of the Duke and fairly laconic in his own way. But as you mentioned there, Clint just kind of sits on the corner of the bar with a shotgun and a pint of beer in his hand, and he's just waiting for things to happen. You never see him really breaking a sweat. When something bad happens, he tends to go, damn it, because he has to do whatever. So there's definitely the man's man era, but there's also the thing where, he can't be asked to do other things, like even at the beginning of this when he's, just sleeping it off in a cell after being too drunk. And like there's the laconic cool of things that he just does enough to get by, just does what he wants. And like you said, he's always in control, but it's very easy to kind of to loosen up to that style, I guess. Whereas, as you mentioned, with Seagal and Arnie and everyone who came after, they're kind of invincible and muscle bound. So there's often a little less personality involved in others, I suppose, and it's more like just ultra killing machines. So Clint has a good balance, I think, of the presence, and there is humor in it as well, you could say, which we'll get into. But the way that he delivers things.
Yeah, nobody scowls from under a hat quite like Clint Eastwood. The other thing as well, for as much as he seems as physically invincible and very much the prototype for an action star that would come. You've seen all the Dirty Harrys. I've seen the first one, but just from his Western persona in general, I think maybe one of the reasons why it doesn't grate on me, and I presume you as much as other action stars, is probably because there is times where he's, I don't want to say intellectually bested, but people do get the best of him in other ways temporarily, and maybe because he seems annoyed by people either saying things wrongly to him or telling him do things that he has to do in that moment. We do see him bested in other ways, obviously temporarily, but it's probably too much of a thing to say he suffers, but we do see him getting very much annoyed through various characters in all these movies. And indeed, this movie, there's a very small little mini story early on in the movie that you alluded to with the shotgun, where he wakes up in prison and he's in there for something stupid, and then he's getting teased by two of the Mexican gang members. And obviously he's handcuffed at this stage, so he can't really do anything about it. And then he gets the upper hand. And I think, what does he do? He throws food at him and hits him over the head with a pot. But because he seems really annoyed while doing all these things, it's less seems like Superman doing all these things. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, the pace and the way that he does it, he just kind of strides over. He, like you said, he's never rushing to break his neck to do something. He just strides over. And it's funny because it's coming, but it is Clint Eastwood, and no one kind of does it the same way. And like you said, he's just like, damn it, he just knocks the lid over, and in his own way, he just gets his own back and everything about the guys, even just taunting him that he couldn't eat their food or soup or whatever just because he was handcuffed. So Clint always, like you said, gets the upper hand, but he takes his time to do it. And it's coming, so it kind of makes the payoff better. And usually, if he doesn't have a one-liner or something, it's like you said, a scowl, or just he lets them know he's angry. He's like, well, that shit does it, something like that, and then he gets on with
it. Yeah, and even like the scene we keep referring to, when he gets released from prison and he waits in the bar with his shotgun, pointed at the door, and the bandit comes in. And there's an almost fake out for a minute where he says, "Oh, maybe I'll see you someday," and he goes, "I think we will." And for a minute, I thought it was going to be resolved a little bit later, but then he comes right back in, and then we get the payoff of that scene instantly, where he just blows him through the door. So even though I did think it was going to happen, there was enough mini tension and dialogue in that scene that maybe made you think it might happen later as well, Yeah,
it was interesting. I thought he was giving him the benefit of the doubt. Like you said, there was set up at the beginning with that, and they're kind of grinning at each other, waiting for something to happen. And it's interesting because that character literally goes straight out the hatch of the saloon and literally does a boomerang, comes straight back in and gets blown away, which is good. Yeah, it's a nice thing to see in what would be a good Sunday theme Western, just no nonsense straight away. And I like the fact that, as you said, the rest of the Mexican gang are kind of trying to escape at the same time. They know that Clint has just killed one of their guys, but they don't kind of have time to deal with it right away. And they're just like, okay, let's just take off. It's how it is. And I think, the setting good for that as well. They capture the saloon, the slow pace at the sun at the middle of the day or whatever time it is. And at first I thought it was Texas based, but apparently it's New Mexico, the scenery and everything, and it just captures that slow burn style Western very well, I think, in the pacing, certainly at the beginning, setting the tone and setting the scene of what's happening, the kind of sleepy town, such.
Yeah, I think this movie was 1971, and probably a few years after The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So initially I thought we were going to get a Tuco-esque situation between him and the bandit. But I actually really like the setup of this movie, where Clint obviously wakes up in town. He's a bit of a curmudgeon, irritable misanthrope, as he always is. And obviously these bandits come into town, and rather than the stereotypical Magnificent Seven type bandits we get often in these Western movies, and I think the director actually directed Magnificent Seven as well, if I'm not mistaken, we get a slightly more complicated for the time depiction of these bandits, where they go into the court, which we've already seen maybe a little bit signs of corruption. Obviously how Clint is treated a little, and how he's dressed down, and how much he has a disdain for the court. It almost primes us for not really liking the justice system and the sheriff to begin with. So when the Mexican bandits come in, and their whole gripe is they've got their land taken away from them, that it's a little bit more complicated than we're normally used to. And actually that plays into the movie as it goes on. So it's not just the sense of bandits are coming into town to rob, they actually feel that their land has been robbed, which is a nice change of the trope, especially in these type of westerns. And the head bandit, what's his name, Chavo or
Louis Chama, right? Louis Chama is all the one.
Yeah, Louis Chama, and he's a little bit more complicated as well because you never really know what his motivations are until later in the movie. Is he just using this like we often see with these cult of personality figures? And I thought the introduction of the gang was very good. What did you think?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, there's a bit more layering to they're introduced as the would-be villains as such right away. Like they come storming and they say, "Everybody, hands up." Like Clint is just getting his marching orders from the judge and the sheriff, like you mentioned, and he just misdemeanor stuff. They said you might do 10 days in jail, or you might have to pay a fine, or you might have to do a kind of community service type thing to make up for what you did. And then just as they're telling that to him, the gang come along, like you said, and they're talking about what's due back to them in terms of the land. So even though they're presented as the kind of would-be villains at first, what they're saying kind of rings true a little bit in that they've been, wronged about all of this thing. And like we said, the setting between Texas, New Mexico, so technically they're right. It would have been their land at some point. It would have been part of Mexico in that area. And what they're saying in general, not just in the movie, is probably true about the land reclamation in general. The same way that it would be for a lot of the cowboys and Indian movies, even before that, I suppose. And yeah, it's good. It's brave of the movie to do it that way, to kind of set up Louis Chama as a type of revolutionary style anti-hero that's going to be interesting to follow. So like you said, it's a very good setup. It's quite a brave setup for this type of Western, because you could see it losing some audience as well who just want straightforward heroes, black and white, and keep it more simple.
Yeah, they want Clint shooting up some Mexicans without any political underscore. Well, or maybe not a political underscore like that. And the movie's written by Elmer Leonard as well, who obviously wrote Hombre, should I say, and Out of Sight, which is a movie that likes these pairings of, obviously it's in Out of Sight, it was George Clooney and was Jennifer Lopez his parole officer, and in Hombre it was Paul Newman and teaming up with an unlikely pair of, I think it's The Villagers. It's been a while since I've seen it. And I like in this that you don't really know how this movie is going to get you to the place you know it's going to go. So initially, the law enforcement offer Clint Eastwood a chance to go after Louis Chama, and he's basically decides to do 10 days service instead of pay the £10 fine for his vagrancy or whatever he was doing. And you think, oh, he's going to be almost conscripted into helping these sheriffs. This is the way this movie's going to go. And then he's like, I don't have a problem with this guy. I'm going to stay here. And it's like, oh, I guess he's staying here. And I was thinking, what's going to happen now? How are we going to get to the point where he goes after this bandit? And then Robert Redford, who I actually really enjoyed in this. I don't think I've seen him play a bad guy. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but he always plays, in Godfather as the reliable number 2, and in Open Range, Salt of the Earth, right-hand man of Kevin Costner. And in this, he has the same mannerisms, but he's a little more nastier and a little bit more unkempt. So when he shows up, and he obviously knows Joe Kidd's reputation as a bounty hunter or a tracker previously, and he tries to get him to do what he wants him to do, hunt after Louis Chama as well. You think, okay, so this is where it's going to go. He's going to have to go with Robert Redford, and then he turns down Robert Redford as well. And you're still thinking it's going to get to a point where he has to go, right? And then it's because he shot that guy early in the bar, which you think is just a throwaway murder. It actually sets up the plot that the Mexican gang runs off with Clint Eastwood horses and ties up his stable hand, and that's enough for Clint to get involved, and that's enough motivation he needs. So it's not even much of a motivation to do it. It's just classic Clint trope of his characters that he pissed me off a little.
Yeah, that's right. So just to correct you something there, Andy, you said Robert Redford. It's always an easy mistake to make when it's thinking about Westerns and Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, but you're referring to Robert Duvall in The Godfather just before accusing about the guy. Yeah. He plays Frank Harlan, right? The wealthy landowner.
Yeah,
you're right. You were saying as kind of like the auspicious villain as such that he's cast in that role. It's very interesting because he's the guy who wants to take down Louis Jarvation. At first you think that he's talking to Clint about something else. He's the one who bails him out of jail, which doesn't seem like a huge risk or anything at first, and you're wondering why, and Clint wants to go see him, and Clint again does his classic doesn't really care thing. He walks up to the hotel saloon that Frank Harlan and his men are staying in and knocks at the door, and there's like a lady there, and Clint says, "Is he here?" And he says no, and straight away he just turns around and walks away, and she says, "Don't you want to wait for me?" He's like, "No." I don't want to wait. So it's classic Clint straight away setting the tone, like, okay, thanks for getting me out of jail. If I have to wait, I'm not in the mood, kind of thing.
Yeah. You know what, as well, what I really liked about the assortment of bad guys, which I think I've only seen in one Western previously, and that's the advanced technology of the firearms was pretty cool. Obviously, we get the standard guns like the Smith & Wesson and Winchesters, and very standard. And obviously, I think it's the Wild Bunch. We get that great Gatling gun sequence where people get absolutely massacred. But I don't think I've ever seen a Western, to my knowledge, which is almost the genesis of what you see in action movies that come after, when you see them getting, what do they call it, like gun porn and stuff like The Matrix, where it's all about, we're going to get this gun and wow, look at this. We get a little bit of that when we see Robert Duvall's Crew, because I can't remember what type of gun it is, but I remember using it in Red Dead Redemption, where it's got a very automatic feel to it, and obviously a really top sniper rifle. So it's the equivalent of in movies like Predator, when the guys are coming with their elite technology. This is the Western version of that, which really sets the stakes higher, that, oh, these guys are not here to play. I really like that.
Yeah, I like the introduction of the henchman as well. It's done well. You know, I think it's the big guy that you're making. Is it Mongo or something like that? He has the dislike of Clint anyway. He's the one with the kind of the auto gun. He's really clearly trigger happy the first time we meet him. He's looking out the window and he's like, "Can I shoot at something, Mr. Harlan?" And Robert Duvall's obviously, "No, please don't. We're just here. Don't start lighting up the town just yet." And of course, him and Clint are the ones like headbutting, and it's funny because Clint obviously gets the better of him a few times, and the other henchmen have a kind of interesting approach. They're just like he never learns, this guy. So they're not completely antagonistic towards Clint either. They're just kind of getting on with what they have to do. And like you said, they're under the or they want people to be under the impression that they're just there for a hunting trip. But with all the firepower that they have, it's clear that they're not. And Clint is straight in on that as well and saying, "Well, that's interesting. You're using these auto guns to take down deer in the mountains. It seems a bit excessive." And then it's obvious very quickly that they're the ones who are looking to get the bounty on Louis Jama, and they have Robert Duvall is very specific things in mind for him and about the land deeds and everything else. So yeah, that sets up the second part of the film very well, and just about what they want to do in terms of taking off after Chama and the rest of his men. It sets that up well. That introduces the characters to a good degree, I would say.
It's a classic motivation for a Western with a landowner that wants to take the deeds, but I think Robert Duvall plays the character with a quiet menace, where he's wearing the face of civilization, but you could tell that this guy got here quite ruthlessly without him having to do much. And obviously, when they're not in towns, you can imagine that they do light up people that will, like that scene where his henchman is literally pointing out the window and he's saying, "Not now. This isn't the time and place." But a little bit later on, when they get flanked by the first Mexican gang and they get a chance to use the firearms and totally massacre them, that's a really good scene. It's setting up the threat of the bad guys as well. And obviously they come across the Louis Chama's girlfriend or whatever she is when they come across her house, and Robert Duvall says to her, "Oh, would you mind if we set up camp here?" And she says, "I think you're going to do what you want to do anyway." And he just lets out a laugh, which kind of says that, yeah, I am going to do what I want. And he plays a very good Western bad guy without leaning too much into the mad, cackling, spitting tobacco menace we normally get. And especially for 1971, it's a nice nuance to the role, I imagine.
Yeah, there's an element of, and obviously this comes way later, but the George Hurst character in Deadwood, there's a similarity there when he comes in season 2 and 3. So that's what you're alluding to there with the face and civilization. You know, at first when you meet the character, both senses, you're not sure what's going to come, and if anything, they become greater villains because, like you said, they're not coming in all guns blazing. You've got the Mongo and the other guys to do that, and kind of just waiting for the chance to shoot, like you said, shoot up at the mountains. And indeed they do once they catch the early kind of stragglers in the Mexican group and ask them, "Where's Chama?" And then they pretty much mow them down right away without mercy. And it's quite a brutal scene. I mean, it's not at the level of the Wild Bunch violence or even the Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I would say it's still, you know, it's still acceptable for, let's say, a Sunday afternoon Western. I mean, the violence comes quick and the bodies do drop, but it's not exactly bloody in the same way. Like you mentioned, they do fire the guns and the weapons quite quickly and they dispatch characters. But it's more in terms of, like, for the necessities of the plot, I would say, just to show that these guys mean business. They're going to track down Chama no matter what, as much as they can.
Yeah, and then we eventually get to the small village on the outskirts of the mountain where I guess we get the final third of this movie where it mostly takes place, where we get this standoff between Louis Chama in the mountains and a scene where Duval says he's going to kill a villager, I think 5 villagers every like few hours, or if Louis Chama doesn't come down by morning or something like that. And at this stage as well, Clint gets fired, essentially. Robert Duvall just says, "Right, you're fired," takes his gun and puts him in the church with the rest of the villagers. And it is quite interesting that the henchman, who he's got a lot of problems with, obviously wants to kill Clint because he's been embarrassed, but the rest of the gang, they seem slightly amused by it, which makes me kind of think he isn't particularly liked any of the henchmen. And even though they are brutal, at the same time, they're almost, I don't know if professional is the right word, but they don't seem like loose cannons. They seem more like cold-blooded, calculated killers. Like, yeah, they're going to kill some townsmen every, 5 townsmen every few hours, because that's what needs to be done. But they're not particularly cruel in their general going about at the town either. They're just there to do a job. So they seem like they're much more hired mercenaries than these hillbilly type level of lunatics that we often get in these movies as well, which I really like.
Yeah, it's true. They're very much, like you said, professional. We mentioned that in the Michael Mann episode as well. They want to get on with the job. Yeah. There's not a lot of cruelty. There's more like just when they have to pull the trigger and get on with things, they do. They don't necessarily stretch it out when they're doing that for torture or any necessary reasons. Like the Mongo guy that you mentioned, the big guy who's on the tower patrol, and then eventually when Clint finally gets rid of him, even then you can see that the other guys didn't like him much because Clint pulls him down from the top of the church, gets his hat, gets his jacket, and even impersonates him pretty funnily, I might add. The guys are saying, "Hey, Mongo, you okay up there?" And obviously Clint is tall enough to pull it off with the jacket and everything else, and he even does an impression of his voice, and I get the hell out. And they just laugh back.
Yeah.
So yeah, I quite like that scene. And then, like you said, they just got on with the rest of their job, and they didn't particularly have any care or feelings for even each other in the group. They're just jobs work there to do whatever Frank Carlin or Robert Duvall's bidding is. So that side of it is very good. It's very, showing them as workmen-like henchmen, suits the movie quite well, I would say. It helps with the pacing, and it doesn't dwell on anything that it doesn't have to, and there's no dragged out, torture sequences and say, this guy's a really, really mean kind of thing.
Yeah. And I really like the scene of Clint escaping from the church as well. It's quite inventive, and they did well to get away with everything they did, because there's a scene where Mango, whatever his name is, he pulls a gun on Clint and he's about to kill him, and obviously Clint doesn't have a gun, and he just gets called away. And the only reason why he doesn't do it is because he needs to switch shift with the other guard at this time. And that's quite a believable reason why it gets called off in that moment. You need to switch position with me right now. And Clint's face is brilliant there, because you get a mixture of quiet rage, but also a little bit of fear that, he wouldn't have had an answer in that situation, because I don't think he had a gun by then. And he soon gets one by the priest that gives him a gun, and then we get a few classic Clint one-liners like, I don't know if the gun will fire. It works all right. And when he climbs up the ladder, and you wonder what he's going to do as the guy above there's a trap door above, and Clint is waiting by the ladder. And as he walks left and right, you wonder what he's actually doing, if he's going to wait for his moment to jump up. And he just pulls the door open as the guard above is pacing, and he falls right down, which looks like a great stunt, actually, because it feels like they definitely had proper stuntmen in this era, and it looks like, or at least it was edited very well, that he fell down quite believably and just dies, and that's how he takes out the first guard. And again, the priest says, I think he's dead. And you get another great Clint one-liner, I think he is, I believe you, or whatever he said. And then, I don't know how they pulled off this without it being cheesy, but he then lowers a pot and swings it back and forth, which would have been cheesy. As they were doing it, I was thinking, how are we going to do this where it doesn't look like Looney Tunes? And they kind of get away with it. I would have liked more swing, maybe, but they just about got away with it. And obviously he escapes at this point, and it's not the most heroic thing, because he basically leaves the villagers as well, as he rides out of town with the Louis Chama's girlfriend to go up to the mountain to actually talk to him. That whole sequence is brilliant.
Yeah, that's classic Clint as well, and he just does his own thing, like there are people to be saved, and again, he's so laconic and laid back. He's like, I might get to them later. And being Clint, he could just go a completely other direction and forget about it and be halfway to another town on his horse and just go, damn it. But like you said, he gets back to them sooner in the pursuance and everything. And just going back to what you said, not just the villains and the setup there, but it's all very professionally done. You can tell, not just writing by Elmore Leonard, but the direction as well, John Sturges, Magnificent Seven. Very experienced, and he did a great escape as well and a few other things. And then obviously you got Clint, Robert Duvall, all by this time in the early 70s, they would have all been after big hits. I think Godfather maybe slightly after this, but still Robert Duvall would have been in a few things by then for sure. And Clint is after Dirty Harry, after Good, the Bad, the Ugly, but the music is by Lalo Schifrin as well, which is quite good. And he did the Dirty Harry soundtrack and a few other things. He did Mission Impossible as well, TV show. So there's a real professional setup all the way through, from the writers to, like you said, the stunts. And that kind of thing helps it in terms of everyone knows what they're doing for the job. There's no rush to get to the climax. So there's no scenes that they just say, we have to gallop through this. So the pacing's actually quite gentle, and it suits the style and the tone that you would see in a very, again, Sunday Western, which is a compliment, that in an interesting way, that you can still watch this in the daytime and kind of take it all in, and it's a good phonic style.
Yeah, I think Robert Duvall did this the same year as The Godfather. And as much as this has very familiar Western tropes, in a way it's a bit unpredictable on how it's set up, even how Clint gets to go about bounty hunting. And when we get to the Louis Chama scene where he goes up to the mountains to tell him to surrender, basically, he didn't really know where that's going to go at that point. Is he going to kill him? Is he going to arrest him? Is he going to convince him? And is this guy genuine? Like, these are questions you still don't know at the latter half of the movie. And not many people know about this Western, and I think it's quite an underrated gem, actually, now having seen it. It holds up very well. Like you said, the director's very good, and the script is very good, and it is subtly unpredictable. And eventually we get to learn that Louis Chama does reluctantly decide to give himself up to an extent. And again, none of these characters, which I like in these old Westerns, none of these characters are depicted as noble. Like, he says something horrible to his girlfriend and you kind of feel he's backed into a corner even when he does decide to sacrifice himself to give himself up, and you still don't know what's going to happen. And obviously it's been established that the courts and the sheriff are pretty shitty early on, so when he's going into town, it's set up nicely because Louis Chama is trying to give himself up, but at the same time Robert Duvall's men are waiting to kill him before he gets to the courthouse. So we got a little bit of 310 humor going on there, even though I actually felt very sorry in the remake for, who was it, Ben Foster, working so hard to rescue.
Oh, yeah. I mean, getting blown away by his boss, yeah.
Yeah. So we have a little bit of that setup going on where someone's trying to do the right thing, but they're being stopped to do it very later in the movie, which I really liked as well. So yeah, a lot going on in that final setup of the town surrendering. And we obviously get another brilliant one-liner scene where there's one guy that Clint really doesn't like, that we haven't seen very much. I think he's the guy that stole his horses from Louis Chama's gang, and he frees all the other Mexican gang members and says, no, you have to come with me. And then he just basically marches him to his death and uses him as a proxy to see how far he has to be away from the bad guys. And then he gets shot, and Clint says, oh, I knew we were too close. And you just wouldn't get away with that edge nowadays, would you?
Yeah, definitely not. And that character, was he also in the jail? I'm trying to think back to the beginning, because I know that he kills the guy who he poured the soup on top of, but there were initially two guys in the jail with him, and both from the same gang. So I'm trying to think back, because eventually, there's so many characters near the end that kind of all of them get a line here and there, but I'm just trying to match up, because I know he didn't like that guy, and I was trying to think, was it the...
You might be right. You might be right.
Which explains a lot, and it gets to go full circle for Clint, because these are, if anything, in the whole movie, these are the two guys that he has a problem with from the beginning, even before the sheriff and the judge. So he gets to come full circle with his revenge on those two, which would make sense as well. And again, it underlines so much about Clint, like not just the justice system and the whole of his Chama, and even the Robert Duvall thing, because he gets sucked into that anyway. His biggest beef is with the guys who wouldn't give him food in the prison.
Yeah, and the other thing is, speaking about movies like Dirty Harry and this as the prototype of an action movie that eventually would be streamlined and obviously taken in another direction, where now, I guess, superhero movies are that, but we get a sequence where a train smashes through the bar, and which is straight out of an action movie, and apparently somebody suggested that happened as a joke. I don't know how true this is, but... And then they got it into the movie, and I presume if they did that, then it's not actually in the original novel written by Elmer Leonard. But yeah, that's a great sequence as well. And the final shootout is really good, and it's very thematically concluded when Clint is sitting with a gun on top of the courtyard. Well, not on top of the courtyard, but he's in the court where the judge normally sits, and Robert Duvall takes out one of the sheriffs, and then Clint is waiting for him and obviously gets the better of him and blasts Robert Duvall out of it. And the sheriff comes in straight after that, and Clint basically says to him, "Get the hell out of, get off my lawn. If get out of my court was an expression that could be used by him, it would have."
Yeah, it's great. It kind of predates, like you said, the Stallone Arnie stuff with the one-liners. You can see where the inspiration comes from. Again, like, you know, there's the face-off with the lead villain, and then they look each other in the eyes, and then bang. And then the sheriff, who's another person who pissed, and the long line of people who pissed off Joe Kidd in this movie, the sheriff's there near the top as well, and he gets his comeuppance too in another way, because, again, he's corrupt and going after Louis Chama and everything, and at least Clint kind of saving the town some face by getting him back and to surrender himself. You would think that the judge might wake up a little bit and give him a bit of a fairer sentence. So he's kind of, by just being so laid back, he's managed to fix a lot of the town's problems in that way too, and maybe even the court system, because it's hard for people to take the sheriff seriously after Clint is the one who brought him back. And Clint even gets a last dig in and knocks the sheriff on his ass again, just neutral in the film. Which is, a nice way for Joe Kidd to get his comeuppance, or get comeuppance on the people who wronged him.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder as well, because obviously, I presume, actually, even though we've never talked about this, that I get a lot of my love from Westerns from my dad, and I presume that it's the same for you, and because a lot of people seem to have that passed down. And after you told me about Joe Kidd and I watched it, I wanted to know if my dad had seen it, and he's never seen it. And it turns out a lot of people haven't even heard of this movie. And I have to ask you, I wonder why that is. And it also gives me hope that, I wonder if there are any other underrated gems of Clint, especially in the Western setting, that we don't know about.
Yeah, I'd only known of this by name. Like I said, I mentioned it to you before, like, had you seen it? Neither of us had it. Eventually we came around to it. And I knew it was a Western, but that was it. I didn't know it had quite such an illustrious, like we said, from director, the producer, even. I didn't know Robert Duvall was in it. All of this stuff was kind of new to me. I just knew it was a Western. That was it. And it had sat on that list for a long time. And I had like low expectations in the sense that I knew I was still going to like it because it's a Clint film, and there's very few of even his Westerns that I don't like. And the ones that would be closer to the bottom for me in terms of his Westerns would be the ones that are on more of the, let's say, the romance kicking in, like we talked about Cry Macho before, and that's also a problem with more of his age as well than anything else. But there was another that I wasn't a particularly massive fan would be The Pale Rider, where it's a mother and a daughter that he has a romantic thing with. And I thought those kind of Clint Westerns are a bit more overkill on that side. But here, again, there's no romantic subplots, nothing like that, nothing to drag down or slow down the pace, which kind of moves aside of the main plot. So all kind of more or less straight through action, you could say, but also, you know, setting a story up nicely from beginning to end. So yeah, really surprised by it in terms of how good it actually ended up being compared to what my expectations would have been.
Yeah.
And the timing as well, like you said, it's coming out in an era of Dirty Harry, Godfather, and even other films at the same time, French Connection. So that might have explained why it didn't do as well, because I would say 70s, early 70s competition, just you could go out every week and see a great movie. And again, this is like a movie that's more than worth your time, but with so many things coming out in quick succession, you know, not everything could be a winner, not everything could be kind of box office smash. And in that time specifically, it was very much like quality and quantity coming out.
Yeah, you might be right. And especially if it did come out the same year as Robert Duvall did Godfather, I wonder if it was a year or two after, maybe his star power combined with Clint might have got more eyes on it as well. I'm not sure. But the other thing is, you mentioned the lesser Clint Westerns. Is there a Western where there's an actual musical where he sings? I remember The Simpsons did they're sitting there watching a Clint Eastwood movie in The Simpsons once, and there's like, gonna paint a wagon, gonna paint it good. I always thought that was a joke, but apparently it turns out that there is an actual musical Western, and I think it even has Van Cleef in it.
I do. I haven't seen that film, but I have heard of it. Yeah, Paint Your Wagon, and again, I haven't watched it because I'm kind of worried how much of that is actually true. So I am aware of that film. It's kind of, that one I've left on the list for a bit longer because it's not one that'll jump to mind. But as we get less Clint films to watch, it might be one we have to come back to. But even from the same, let's say, era of like going back to late 60s to early 70s Clint, there's a lot of good stuff there as well. There's Hang 'em High. I don't know if you've seen that, which isn't that dissimilar to Joe Kidd. It's kind of a straightforward plot as well. And I mean, you've obviously seen The Outlaw Josie Wales and even High Plains Drift.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Really strong 70s Clint. They're up there in terms of like Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I would say they could also be in the same breath, let's say, because they're really strong, well directed, and like obviously Clint directed both of those, so it's kind of that set him off on a completely different tangent of his directing days and kind of being able to match star directing power. But yeah, those two are really high up there. I would say like Joe Kidd sits just beneath, like, let's say, High Plains Drifter, Outlaw Josie Wales. It's on the next tier of really, really good Clint Westerns, like on the let's say 4-star tier rather than the top classics, but still, like, for any Clint fan, it's basically a must to check out in that sense.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. All right, Dennis, thanks for coming on the show. We'll leave it there. We might come back with another Clint movie, whether that's Paint Your Wagon or something else next time. I'll talk to you again.
Cheers, Andy. Yeah, hopefully something else.